Creature Commandos was our first proper look at the DCU. Yes, I know most of the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker are also canon, before you comment it. And this first look has given us not only a look at a rich and colourful world of heroes and villains, but also of a society that casts out those who are different or have ceased their usefulness. And this is what I believe Creature Commandos as a series explores, or to sum it all up into a nice and concise sentence, Creature Commandos is a story about what it means to be a monster. So if you find yourself entertained at any point during the video, then consider liking, subscribing and ringing that bell. Anyway, on with the video. The Creature Commandos, as you'd expect by the name, are all creatures. What groups them all together, despite how different they are, is the simple fact that they are not considered human. A corpse, a robot, a radioactive skeleton, a fish and a weasel. It doesn't matter if they once were human, if they once were loved and cherished. As far as anyone in the present is concerned, they are now just monsters. And it is how each of these characters is treated, why each of them is labelled as a monster, that I wish to discuss in this video. As even if they are fantastical monsters, the prejudice they face, the struggles they are forced to endure, are all very much real in our real world. These after all aren't movie monsters, they are people, who Amanda Waller has labelled as monsters and shoved on the Creature Commandos. The bride, as said, is a corpse. Well, to be more precise, she's an amalgamation of corpses, various pieces of what were once people hobbled together into a new human-shaped creature, the Bride of Frankenstein. Eric desired a wife, and his father and creator Victor Frankenstein complied, creating for him a female companion. Eric was created in order to create life, and in that way, you can't really deny that Victor succeeded, as Eric was alive. But the bride had a much taller order to live up to than just being alive, she also had to be Eric's wife. Whereas Eric was given the freedom to be whoever he wanted, in a way representing the idea of life itself, the bride didn't get a choice, she was built to fulfill one role, and so that was what was expected of her. She wasn't to get a say in the matter. She was not a person, she wasn't even like Eric, she was more akin to a product, created to fulfill a task and only that task. That is how Eric saw her, and at first Victor too, but as she learned, as she became a person in her own right, Victor allowed her not to be the bride but to be herself. By embracing her, he was allowing her to be who she wanted to be. By making love to another man, she was outright rejecting her purpose of being a bride to no one but Eric. Her choosing Victor over Eric is symbolic of her choosing to walk her own path instead of the one laid out for her. She was rejecting the notion of inherent purpose, as we can become whatever we want to become. However, she was punished for this. Eric killed Victor, taking away the man she genuinely loved. She was punished for trying to live the way she wanted, and this made her doubt herself. This is why she subconsciously decided she was a monster and not a person. Beautifully shown in episode 2, where she says the mansion she was created in wasn't for family, just for work. She sees herself as nothing more than Victor's work. Yet deep down she still cherishes that small moment of time where she was happy, where she didn't feel like a monster. Hence why she is so obsessed with getting back that necklace, as although Eric surely gave her many presents, this was the only one that held actual feelings to the bride. But this necklace is all that's left of those feelings. Apart from this one physical object, she now is nothing more than a monster. As said in the brothel, she has no respect for her own life. She uses her body as a weapon, treats it as a tool, because she has lost all value in herself. She has nothing left in the world she cares for, so she doesn't give a damn about the world or anybody else. But as shown by how she projects her own insecurities onto the brothel workers, she is acutely aware of this and deep down does want to change. But she was unable to, always chained to her past. Every time she found a new life, a new purpose, a new career, Eric would rock up and shatter any new normalcy she had acquired. He serves as a physical reminder of her past and her purpose. He is the past she cannot escape from. Until she is rid of him, she can never be anything beyond his bride. Hence why throughout the series, the name she goes by is the Bride, because she is still defined by the purpose of her creation, still hunted down by Eric. However, throughout the series she comes to change, but once she finds something and makes it stick. She stands up for the brothel workers, fights to protect the choices of others. She forms a new connection with Nina, in her words her first true friend, and then kills Elena not to save the world but to avenge this friend. Among these monsters, the bride can be something beyond just the bride. Among normal people, she will always stand out. Her scars and stitches make it obvious she is different from them, that unlike them she was created not born. But among monsters, this is not the case. By the end of the series, she found her purpose, leading the Creature Commandos, fighting alongside people like her who had their lives dictated to them because of things outside of their control. She no longer in my eyes is just the bride, she is so much more than the simple wife for Frankenstein's monster. G.I. Robot was a machine made by man to fight Nazis. Much like the Bride, he was created for a purpose, however unlike the Bride, he did not fail in this purpose. No, he exceeded expectations. G.I. became the ultimate weapon for annihilating Nazis. He was praised as such, seen as a hero because of it. But then the moment the war ended, when killing Nazis wasn't in the interest of the US government any longer, well then he was no longer seen as a hero, not seen as cutting edge technology. Nope, he became an obsolete piece of tech, one to be studied and used as a research tool. He was stripped of his identity as a war hero and became nothing more than a piece of reference material for the creation of the Metal Men. G.I. Robot wasn't just a weapon, he was a person, he had feelings. When Dr. Magnus asked G.I. what he would want to do if he had no directive, he said that he wanted to see his boys again. Easy company meant something to him. This is proof that G.I. has feelings beyond just his programming. I mean, it's obvious in the present day when he calls Nina his friend, or when he goes out of his way to save her from under that barbed wire. But no respect is shown to these feelings. He helped win the goddamn war, fought alongside Easy Company, some of the greatest heroes the US Army ever saw. But as soon as he outlived his purpose, he was thrown aside. Now there's some very obvious commentary there on the US Army and the treatment of veterans, but for GI specifically, he ended up as a piece of military memorabilia, passed from collection to collection. He was so unimportant to the government, they literally sold him off. And then tragically, when he did find a new friend, when he found a home, got to, in some small way, form another connection like he had with Sergeant Rock and Easy Company, he discovered they were neo-Nazis. And so he did what he was built for, what he before had been praised for, and he killed those Nazis. Yet even though he did what he was made for, what the government created him for, he was the one punished for it. Not the government who made him this way. No, G.I. Robot himself. He was treated as just a machine when it was useful for the government, and then tried as a man when they didn't want to take the blame. Sure, times have changed, and what G.I. did was not the right thing to do. But you cannot blame the guy, this was everything to him. Killing Nazis was his purpose, and killing Nazis alongside his friends was what made him happy. He was labelled as a villain, as a monster, for the same things that made him originally be called a hero. Nothing about G.I. changed, the world changed around him, and the people in that world dictated to him what he is. Because that is what the world does, it sticks labels on you and then treats you as if that label is all you are. If you escape your purpose, you are a monster, as shown with the Bride, but even if you do follow it, you're also a monster, as shown with G.I. By joining the Creature Commandos, G.I. got to relive those feelings he experienced during the war. He got to kill Nazis alongside friends. He died happy, died doing what he was made to do, but also what he wanted to do. It didn't matter if he was praised or vilified for doing it. What mattered to this Tin Man is that he did what he loved. And hopefully now he is back in action with a brand new body, he will continue to kill Nazis alongside those he calls friends. Cheers to the Tin Man. Weasel, out of all of the Commandos, is the one most easily labelled as a monster. He is incapable of speech, of questionable intelligence, and well, he's a giant weasel. His outside appearance and actions all scream monster, and so he was labelled as one. He was arrested for the massacre of children, but as we learn, this is not the truth. All he did was play with some kids, but because he looked the way he did, like a monster, he was labelled as a werewolf and had the cops called on him. A series of tragic accidents beyond Weasel's control occurred, and the kids were killed. However, the worst of all is that one of those kids' death was on Weasel's hands. Because it was a child he tried and failed to save. A child who he was prevented from saving by the cops called on him for looking the way he did. Weasel cannot talk, but he still thinks and he still feels. He tried his absolute hardest to save that girl, showed no malice to the policeman literally shooting at him. His one and only desire was to save her. Weasel was a hero, there is no other word for what he did, for risking his life to save somebody else's. But he was misunderstood, they saw what he looked like and made up their minds, and because of that a child died, who could have been saved. If Weasel didn't look like that, things would have gone very differently. If he wasn't called a monster just for looking like that, at the very least that girl would still be alive. But he wasn't, and so he was arrested for something he did not do, called a child killer even though he only wanted them to be safe. the number of kids that died even being inflated in the Suicide Squad to 27, and nobody even questioned it, because of course this monster would kill 27 children. They don't give him the benefit of the doubt, don't even check the facts, they take one look at him and that's enough. Weasel is quite possibly the most tragic character in this show because he cannot even defend himself. He is basically an animal, but is one who is capable of emotions given his reaction to the picture of the girl who he tried to save, and the connection he forms with Alana. I mean, the only real thing Weasel does in this show, attacking Cersei and warning Alana, are both acts in service to trying to save a person he cares for. There is no malice in this Weasel, yet he is punished as if he is some rabid beast. After being shot at, Weasel escapes into the woods, and there he meets and befriends a pack of wolves. They play together and sleep together. He could have stayed with them, could have lived a happy and free life. Yet he chose to go back to the castle because he wanted to see Alana again, wanted to save her. He put her safety above his own, just like he did with that girl in the fire. Weasel is the ultimate example of judging a book by its cover, a kind soul who wants others to be safe and happy, but because of the simple fact he looks different, he is locked up and sent on suicide missions. My only hope for this Weasel is that he has formed a strong bond with the other Commandos, because with both the people he truly cared for now dead, they may be the only people that can bring this kind Weasel some comfort. If the Bride was created as a monster, G.I. Robot was reclassified as a monster, and Weasel was called a monster, then Dr. Phosphorus is a man who turned into a monster. He wasn't mislabeled like G.I. or Weasel, and he wasn't born that way like the Bride. No, he is someone who was once human, once treated as normal, and went on to become a monster, both in body and later in heart. Now, Phosphorus from the start of the show has always been presented as the most sadistic and cold-hearted of the Commandos. He is ruthless, his way of fighting causes the most pain and suffering one can imagine. He shows no mercy in how he kills, no restraint at all. He's the only Commando I do think the word evil villain really applies to. Dr. Phosphorus, or as he was once known, Alex, was a brilliant scientist trying to make the world a better place. His research would cure cancer, it would save millions of lives. But in order to get the money for his research, he had to turn to unsavoury places. Rupert Thorne specifically. The thing is that as part of their agreement, Alex's research had to be shared with Bialia. And being a good man who wants to cure cancer, Alex was not a fan of this idea. Bialia being, an oppressive regime, possibly ruled by the dictator Queen Bee. But Rupert Thorne did not like his attempts to give over faulty data and did what any sane man would. Murdered Alex's family, framed him for the crime, and then stuck him in his own radiation chamber to atomise him. Thorne, despite looking like a man, is far more of a monster than anyone we have talked about today, and so it's only fitting when Alex survived this experience and turned into the radioactive skeleton we all know and love. He became a monster by becoming just like Rupert Thorne. Alex, now Dr. Phosphorus, went on to murder Thorne and his family, replicating what was done to him. Although you could argue he had become a monster at this point, having killed children in his revenge-fueled rampage, I feel like if he had stopped here, had gotten his revenge and then given up, then he would have been left nothing more than a tragic figure gone mad. But that is not what he does. He takes over Thorne's crime empire, becomes a kingpin of Gotham, he indulges in riches and murder, he exploits and terrorises the innocents of Gotham for the sake of his new cardinal desires. This is when he becomes a monster to me, because this is when he becomes one not just in appearance but in heart too. He became the same as Rupert Thorne, and that's what makes him a monster. Dr. Phosphorus is the only Commando in my opinion who chose to become a monster. Sure, tragic events led to this, but he was the one who gave in to desires and became a kingpin. He calls himself a monster because that is what he believes he is. Now that's not to say there isn't some goodness left in him. His fondness for children, for example, is still present. But so is the sadistic pleasure he takes in burning a man's throat out or stomping on one's head. He is proof that even a normal man can become a monster, but more importantly, that what is inside is just as, if not more of a reason to label one as a monster. Now, if Phosphorus was turned into a monster in an attempt to kill them, Nina was turned into a monster in an attempt to save her. Born with a rare condition that led to her lungs being on the outside of her body, Nina's life was under threat from the moment she was born. Without the intervention of her father, she would have died an infant, but due to his efforts, she survived. And even if unencumbered by her father's machine, she was alive and most importantly, she was happy. Yet her mother didn't see it that way, leaving her daughter forever and wishing they had let her die when she was born. In her mother's defence, she genuinely did believe that Nina's life would be one of constant suffering, but even so, she left her young daughter, leaving her father to alone pick back up his daughter. In an attempt to save her forever, her father conducted a genetic experiment, one that went very wrong, leading Nina to become part fish. She now had the appearance of a monster, much like Weasel. However, she was not treated like a monster. Her father loved her despite her appearance. She was his daughter, and that's how he saw her. The problems arose when she went to school, because for the first time, people other than her father were looking at her, and these people didn't see her the same way. They didn't see a human, they saw a fish, a frog, a monster. She was bullied for her appearance, her life made miserable because of the appearance her father gave her. However, Nina never blamed her father for what he did for her, because he loved her. In fact, she left home specifically because she did not want to burden him any further. She gave up her humanity and her normal life for his sake. She lived like a monster, stalking the lakes and sewers out of love for her father. The world rejected her, and so she left it behind, hoping by doing so she'd make the life of the one person she loved easier. But by doing so, all she did was leave him miserable, blaming himself for her disappearance, and eventually, this led to his death, with him being gunned down by police as he tried to reach her. She was treated as a monster, not as a human, and so she did as the humans wanted and left their world. However, that wasn't good enough, and she was dragged back into the human world, wrongly imprisoned for doing nothing wrong and shoved on a task force despite just being a person with gills. Nina, like Weasel, was only a monster on the outside, persecuted because of her appearance. She tried to escape it, but she could not. The persecution man has is not so easily escaped. Through the creature Commandos, she was able to form new connections with those who will not be disgusted by her appearance. In fact, the Bride doesn't even consider her to be a monster. G.I. Robot and the Bride became her good and honest friends, seeing her not as a fish monster but as a kind person. The agony the Bride felt over Nina's death was a testament to the connection the two formed, that the Bride saw the kind Nina underneath. The Bride tried to push Nina to become a true monster like the rest of them by killing the princess, hoping that by doing so she'd give Nina a place to belong. But by doing so, by embracing this role, Nina ended up dead. Because she never was a monster, she always was a kind human girl, always putting her own interests aside for others in hopes of lessening the burden for them, be it her father or the Commandos. But as we know, this led to a death which indirectly did save the world. Because if not for Nina's death, the Bride wouldn't have stepped up and capped Alana. Nina in that way did save the world, but not through her aquatic abilities. No, it was due to her human heart, the one that got through to the Bride and formed with her a real connection. If you were to ask me to define a monster in Creature Commandos, it would be a person looked down upon by society and cast out by being a quote-unquote human. Whether they be originally human, originally a war hero, if they are seen by others as well, another, as outside of the norm in a negative way, then they are a monster. In other words, there is no actual definition of a monster, no criteria one must fulfill to be a monster. A monster is what one calls a monster, nothing more, nothing less. But likely for our Commandos, even if the rest of the world looks down on them as monsters, to another monster, a monster isn't anything all that special, and so they can connect to one another and view each other as the people they are, not as the monsters the world sees them as. That said, considering the first chapter of the DCU is called Gods and Monsters, I think it's safe to say that we will be revisiting this concept soon, be it in Swamp Thing, Season 2 of Creature Commandos, or even maybe in the rumoured Deadman TV show. I honestly don't expect this video to get many views, given how this is not a series I would usually cover on the channel. But if you did enjoy it and want to see future coverage of the DCU on this channel, because I do plan to do that, then make sure to subscribe and comment down below what you thought of Creature Commandos Season 1.